So to be able to launch Python, so there's actually two kind of things that are bundled with this installer. So the first is the Python interpreter. So that's what actually is running your Python code. So unlike C++ and like Java, where you have to compile it, Python programs you don't need to compile it. What happens is the interpreter kind of translates your Python into the ones and zeros directly that are readable by machines. All right, so that is the difference. So that also means that if you don't have the Python interpreter installed, most of the time you can't actually run your Python program. Okay, but the other thing that is actually bundled is something called an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. So it's a really basic one, but it's called idle. So this is actually what we're going to be using for most of the year in writing our programs. Now, definitely, if you're going to be doing this for work or something, you'd want something a little more full featured. But because a contest solution is generally one file, it's generally better to just have something really quick to open. So if you go ahead and open idle, you're going to go ahead and, well, you'll be able to see this. It'll just say Python 3.8 or whatever version you have installed. To be able to actually create a new file, just go ahead and click File, then New File. And then we'll have blank document. All right, so this is what we'll be using for now. Just before we start, just go ahead and save it. We're just going to call this week 1. And just that way that when you click run, it won't ask you to save. It's just a little... all right, so everyone has idle I'm open, I'm assuming. So we can actually just go ahead and start off with Python. So a lot of you guys already have done Python, which is good. So you'll know that it's a little more of a different programming language. So in a typical kind of program, let's see, in like a typical program, here, let me just pull up an example of a typical program, I guess. All right, like stuff like this, right? This is more of what you'd see as like a typical, right? You have like all these weird curly brackets and all this stuff. So Python is more beginner friendly, so that means that you don't need to use any curly braces or anything. You actually just can type stuff in. So for example, if I go ahead and say print hello world, right? I don't need a semicolon first of all, and also I don't need any curly brackets. So it's super simple. Just then if you have a new line, just enter, enter, enter. And then if you do need to say something like if true, for example, you put a colon and then you idle actually do it for you automatically. It'll just add an indent. So then once you're done with the if statement, you just backspace and do the next one. All right, so this is a double-edged sword, obviously. It's really easy for people to grasp, but then also sometimes you want to do certain things and you have to really force Python to do it, if that makes sense. For example, like this, you can't just have an empty thing. So if you weren't sure what you wanted to do and you wanted to get started on your else first, this actually won't run. You have to put like just like 1 + 1 basically, or any, you just put something there. Otherwise, it'll tell you that it's incorrect. All right, so let's actually get started with some basic Python concepts. So the first is outputting. So you'll be doing that a lot, and that is just simply with print, and then just put in whatever thing you want to print. So for example, we're going to do the traditional hello world thing. If we run it, you can just click F5 to run it. Let's just say hello world. So yeah. Any questions so far? You can barely see my screen. Huh. The text is still, oh gosh, okay. Let's jack this up to 300%. Okay. Let's see if this is better. Is that better? All right, it's better. That's good. Okay. Wow, this is so weird for me. My mouse is like super sensitive. Okay, so you guys can all see now. Okay, so has everyone gotten this running? This is a quick system check. Make sure that everything works as it should. If you guys can run this, that means that you'll most likely be fine. All right, so anybody have any problems? I'm just gonna wait a bit to see if anyone says anything. But if not, oh my gosh, this sensitivity is terrible. Let's turn off mouse. Run isn't showing. Okay, just give me a sec. I'm just changing my cursor speed to something a little more. All right, great. That's better. All right, sorry, we're run. You don't see this? So did you create a new file? Well, so are you in the shell right now, or are you in the file editor? So it says your file name.py and then you're in the shell. Yeah, so you gotta go to file and then new file. And this will say. So something that is actually just good to touch on right now is, unlike a lot of languages where you need to actually compile, you can actually directly put Python code in here. So if I just say print hello world, it'll also work in the shell. Right, so that's just something useful if you just want to quickly test something out. You don't even need to make a file. You can just go directly in the shell. All right, so is everyone okay? Has everyone run this program at least once? Okay, that's good. All right. So I guess the next thing we'll touch on here are variables. So variables are a way to store information. So whether that be a number, a word, or like a list or anything, these are all variables. And actually we refer to variables with names. We actually have some naming restrictions in Python for what variables can be named. So it's pretty straightforward. You can use any letters, any numbers, and you can also use an underscore. However, your variable names cannot start with a number. All right, so this is fine. This is also fine. This is fine, but this is not fine. Okay, so just keep that in mind whenever you're doing anything. You can also do this. However, generally this is used for something else when you put an underscore in between before. So I wouldn't name any of your variables starting with an underscore. All right. So also another thing is that variables are case sensitive. So these two variables are not the same. All right. See, there's a capitalized J. That one isn't capitalized. That's different. So just be aware of that. Luckily, they do use a font that you can easily tell between like L's and capital L's and stuff like that. So just in I's. So it's a lot easier with this font. All right. But then after, to assign a value to the variable now, right? You just go ahead and hit enter. Enter equals, and then you can put whatever. So for example, if you want to put a string, which is like words and stuff, you just put either a double or a single quote. So in Python, a double and a single quote actually mean essentially the same thing. However, in other languages, single quotes actually mean just a single character. So if you put like this equals with a single quote, it actually can only store one letter or one number, or like one letter, right? So just to get you in the habit, I would always use double quotes, just so that when you move to another language, you aren't used to something else, and then you have to switch again. All right. So double quotes are for strings. Then for any numbers, you can just put the number directly in. A really awesome feature about Python is that there actually really isn't a set largest number and then you need to use something else, right? So for example, in Java, you have like ints, or then after you have your big integers, right? or in C++ you have your you have right, you have modifiers to control how big your number is. In Python, Python actually does all the work for you, and it will automatically jiggle itself around to make sure that your number will fit. All right, so you can put any number; it can be as big as you want. This will definitely error in Java or C++, but you'll be fine in Python. So one last thing to worry about. Another thing is floats. So floats are basically any numbers with decimals. So yeah, those are the three basic ones. There are a few more that we'll be working on later, but to get started, we'll just be using strings and numbers and floats. So any questions about those? No, excuse me. No, you don't. But what version do you have? Oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. That's that's fine. As long as you're not like, I think around 3.6. If you're older than 3.6, we're gonna have a few differences. So I would update if you're older than that. Okay, so does everyone understand? We have numbers and floats and strings. Okay, so the next thing that we kind of want to touch base on is comparing variables. So right, a lot of contest questions will be about, oh, which is bigger, or how many do you have? So there actually is a very easy way to compare things in Python again, right? A recurring thing you'll see in Python is it's really meant to be a lot more easier. So it's really good for these contest solutions or stuff where you just want to get going. But unfortunately, it does fall a bit short when you're trying to build a larger program that isn't just a contest solution. All right, but that's why we'd like to introduce it, because we don't need to worry about too many things. So in terms of these comparisons, they're super simple. So the first one is the equality. So equality is, we can actually do these in the shell. So equality is just measuring whether two things are equal. So for example, we can say 1 equals 1. That's true. So all of these operators return a Boolean. So that is another type of variable. So that's either true or false. All right. So yeah, it's just true or false. So we have 1 equals 1. That's obviously true. But if we say 1 equals 2, that's going to be false, right? Next we have let me just pull up my lesson plan here. Next we have does not equal. So does not equal is the exact opposite of equals. So if we say 1 does not equal 2, it'll be true. All right. Next up is less than or equal to. So 1 is less than or equal to 2. But if we go -1, it's no longer false. It's false now. All right. We also have greater than or equal to. Right. You can also mix these types if you want. You'll get the same answer. And then we have, of course, the less than and greater than. All right. So any questions so far about these comparators? These are the same ones that you're using in math, except for the double equals, obviously. So you should be okay with it, but does anyone have any questions? Wonderful. Oh, someone's typing. Okay, so plus greater than, so that's greater than or equal to. Yeah. All right, so in math, right, you'd have like uh, you'd have like that, but obviously we can't do that on our keyboard, so we just mash them together. All right. So the equal sign is always after. So like for example, less than or equal to is less than and then equal to. All right. So now I want to introduce something that's kind of different about Python. It's a new keyword. It's called is and is not. So when we have 1 equals 1, this is true. All right. And 1 is 1, that's also true. However, the difference between double equals and is that equals just test that the two objects are equal. However, they don't necessarily need to be the same object. So for example, right, let's say I have these 2 Honda Civics here, okay? And I bought one and my friend buys another one, all right? So they are the same car, right? But they're also not the same car because I own one and then like we can drive both at the same time, right? It's not the same car. It's just every single property of the cars are the same. All right. So does that make sense? Where is checks that it is literally the same car. However, double equals just checks that that all the properties of the cars are equal, so that in effect they are the same, but they're not. So double equals will be able to check, for example, if I got in my car and it was just literally replaced one day, I wouldn't be able to tell. However, it's not the same car. However, is would check that is literally my car that I bought. So does that make sense to everyone? And this is something that people sometimes don't quite pick up at first, but it is important because sometimes you do want to check that it is the exact object that you're referring to, where other times you just want to check if they're equivalent. So any questions? All right, so that's good. All right, so most of the time you can use them interchangeably, but honestly, I would just use double equals most of the time because other programming languages, it's double equals. All right, so that is comparing stuff. Now, there is one thing is you might be thinking, what about strings? So strings are a bit different. However, they're also pretty similar. So instead of, you might be wondering how they're able to compare it, and that's because every single character in a word is actually mapped to a number. So if you say, for example, say hello is greater than apple, this will actually be true because hello is further along in the dictionary. All right, so Python's actually able to just translate these characters into numbers, and then it compares the numbers. The number starts at A, and then after it ends at Z. So it's the same relation as the alphabet is. Okay. However, you do need to make note of something. Is that, for example, if we say apple is not equal to apple. All right. So that is because capital A and lowercase a share don't share. They have different codes. So for example, A, if we go ahead and look at this, A is 65, all right, but lowercase a is 97, all right? So just be aware of that. So for example, if I say apple is greater than apple, it'll be false. It's apple is less than apple, all right? So just be aware of that. You will come across questions that do ask you to sort things in alphabetical order. So this is one way you can do it, but I would just be careful to make sure that they're all in the same case. Otherwise, you're going to run into that problem. All right. Yeah, but it should be fine. So that is all of the comparing stuff. Do you guys have any questions about comparing stuff? Great. Okay. So next thing I want to touch on is Boolean stuff. So let's say I have a Boolean. It's true. Okay, let's store it in a variable. So let's call it test equals true. Not. All right. So I can actually do a lot of operations on this without having to check what the variable of test is. So for example, let's say I wanted to invert it. So if it was true, it'd be false. If it was false, it was true. Well, there's actually two ways of doing this in Python. You can do test equals exclamation mark test. Oh, sorry, not test. That's for something else. Test equals not test. And then after this will flip it. So now this is false, right? Or a longer way, and I would never do this. I don't recommend doing this. Is saying if test. So that means that if it's true, you'd say test equals false, all right? But please don't do this. And then you'd say, oh, well, if it's not true, then it must be false. All right, please don't do that. Okay, just do the not thing. It's a lot easier. All right. This is also how you can say is not. So 1 is not 1, it'll be false, right? So again, this is kind of, they try to incorporate some English into this so that it's easier to read your code. All right, any questions about those? That's just a really quick thing I wanted to touch on. I couldn't really fit it anywhere else. But does anyone have any questions about that? Wonderful. All right, no questions about that. Now, next thing that is something that's super useful here is string splicing. So let's go ahead and clear this a bit. Let's just close this and open it back up. So if you've programmed in other languages, right, you probably are a bit familiar with how they do string operations. However, in Python, it's actually super straightforward. So we use these square brackets. So let's just have a string here. Let's say Massey. Okay. So to be able to access a specific character, you simply just access it with a square bracket. So let's say I wanted the character at 1. So what is this? Would this be M or would this be an A? All right, is A. Anybody think it's M? Wonderful, it is. It'd be A, right? So whenever we're talking about indexes of a string or indexes of honestly anything, everything starts at 0. All right, so if we want to get M, we'll be starting at 0. All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. If you've done Python before, hopefully you knew that. All right, because that's super important. And you really need to be, honestly, some people just forget about it and they don't think of it as anything, but really it's so important because, yeah, dude, you type text and then you put test. All right. Where was I? Oh yeah, some people just completely forget about this, but it's so important, especially in contest questions. If they're using like X and Y, and they're using like, sorry, not X and Y. If they're using lists, for example, and they're saying the first person is person 1, well, you really need to make sure that if you're just adding them in order, that you're like operating on it, right? So you're either saying, I'm gonna take their input and always subtract 1, or I'm going to add one to my internal sorting. Otherwise, you're going to be selecting the wrong person, all right? So that's just something you do need to make sure of and to remain cognizant of so that you don't lose points on contests. But anyway, so that's how to access a character. Now let's say I wanted to get a small percentage of the word. So let's say I wanted to get MAS from Massey. So what would I do is I would go test and use the square bracket again. But now we're going to say where we want to start. So we want to start at character 0. Put a colon here. And then after, let's say we're going to go to character number 2. However, if we put character 2, you'll see here that it only puts MA. So the last number here isn't actually counted. So you need to go 1 after that. So if we wanted to get MAS, we'd get 0 to 3, and that would give us MAS. All right. Is that clear? If you want to go all the way to the end of the word, so let's say I wanted to go SEY, I can just go from character, and then I can just leave this blank. So I can go from 3 all the way to blank, and that'll give me the just from starting there to the end of the word. All right, and then you can also do this from the inverse. So if you want to start at the beginning, you can just leave that empty, and then let's say all the way to 3, sorry, and you'll get MAS again. All right, so any questions about that? All right, I'm gonna take that as a no, which is fine. All right, and then finally we have a last thing. So let's say I want to get every other letter. So what I can do is I can say of Massey. So I can just actually put, let's say, double colon, and I can put 2. So now what it's gonna do, it's actually gonna grab every other letter. So I guess the syntax for this is start, then end, and then step. So by combining these, we can actually do quite a bit. So let's say I wanted to grab every other letter. Let's actually make it a little longer. So let's say Vincent Massey Secondary. So if we wanted to grab every single letter starting at the 5th character and ending on the let's say 13th, we can say 5. We want to end on 13, which means we're going to go to 14, and then we can go every other letter, which is going to be every 2 letters, and we get NEMES, right? Now, what's really awesome about this is we can actually use negative numbers. So whenever we put a negative number, it basically means to go backwards. So if we say test 1 at -1, we're going to get Y. All right. If we want to say test -1 all the way to -5. Oh, sorry. Is it 5? Oh, wait, no. No, this should... Oh, no, sorry. It's because we're actually stepping in the wrong direction. So if we want to go backwards, we need to make sure we're stepping -1s. And then after, you'll see that this is actually going to be flipped. But that's to be expected because it's hitting this one first. And then after, we're going that one second, and that one third. So if we want to flip a string, it's actually super easy. We can just say ... and then after a -1. And then we have the string that's flipped. All right, so that's super. Honestly, the negative numbers are super useful. In a lot of languages, you need to get the length of it and then go back 1. Right? With Python, you can literally just go -1, and you'll get there. All right. So any questions about that? About these string manipulation? No questions. All right. Okay, well, so next up, we're going to move on to input. So again, guys, I'm moving fast because first of all, a lot of you guys have already done Python, but also a lot of this is called syntax, right? Like the actual how you word things in the programming language. This stuff is super easy to search up and to go over. So I really just want to expose you guys to it so you know it's there. And then if you ever need help to just search it up because right, this isn't another programming course. We're doing competitive programming where we're actually going to be learning more on the strategic side of what to be doing. Okay, but always, of course, if you have questions, feel free to ask. So next up, we're going to be doing something that is also very important. And this is actually kind of the same importance as being able to output something, and that is to get input. So remember at the start, we had a print statement, right? To print, we can output with hello world. Now, how about this? How are we supposed to get input from the user, right? And we actually have a really nice command that's called input. All right. So input returns a string. So you have to be careful of that, and I'll show you why. So let's say we put a test equals input, and let's print out test. Right? So now if I type in hello, it's going to print out hello. Okay. However, let's say that I want to multiply something. So it's a calculator, right? So let's say welcome to, we'll just say whatever. Say test 1, okay, and we want to multiply this by 5. We're going to return a number by 5. So we're going to say test times 5. Right, so let's say 5. We get 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. That is because we're actually being given a string, right? And then a really cool thing about Python is that if you multiply a string, what happens is that Python just repeats it over and over again. So if I say hello, and I repeat that, you get hello, 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 hello. All right, so what we need to do is we need to cast this to an integer. So casting is when you're changing types. So to cast in Python, generally you just wrap it in the type. So for example, to cast to an integer, you put it inside int. If you want to cast it to a float, you can cast it that way. Or if you want to cast it to a Boolean, you can cast it that way. All right. Yeah. So sorry, we're going to go with int. So now if we do this, we'll say 5, it'll give us 25. All right, so if the contest questions are asking for numbers and giving you numbers, make sure you're casting those into ints, especially if you're going to be doing any multiplication. All right. So another thing is that input, so you guys might have worked with like Java or C++, if you guys, some of you guys may have, but you guys would have noticed that it's token-based input from like a lot of the ways you implement inputting. So that means that if you ask for input, it'll first get hello, then it'll get word. But in Python, everything is line-based. So that means that no matter how many spaces I have, it'll always say one line. It'll always put the input into one line. So for example, if I said hello world, right? Oh, well, yeah, I'm trying to cast that. Obviously can't do that. Right, so if we do this, as you can see, it takes that, takes just that line and it goes over and over again, all right? So then if you want to get the next line, you're gonna have to type input again. Okay, and just please be aware that you can't go back. So if you want something, you're gonna have to store it. So if I say test, say test 2, right? There's no way for me to get, if I say hello, and I said bye, there's no way for me to get that bye if I don't store it inside test. Okay, so just be aware of that. Yeah. Then the final thing that we're going to go over this week before I give you guys some time to do some really basic contest questions is loops. So for example, let's say I wanted to add a number 5 times. So essentially I wanted to, yeah, so let's say I wanted to add a number 5 times, okay? So of course you can always say like test plus 3, right? But let's say we're adding 1 each time, and let's say that we're actually going to ask the user how many times that we want it to be added. So we can say input, and then here's a really cool thing is we can actually put some text into here, and this will be what Python outputs as a prompt to the user. So for example, we'll say, how many times now, be aware, do not use this on contests, all right? 99.99% of the time, you should not be outputting anything, all right? But this is more useful for user-facing programs. This is not useful for contests. And I've seen so many people do this and they get the question wrong, but they do everything right. It's because they're actually outputting something, and that counts as output. This is actually equivalent to you doing this and saying, oops, I forgot to copy that. This is you equivalent to saying this. All right, and once people see that, they're like, oh yeah, obviously I'm outputting something, but that's the same thing here, all right? So please remember to not be asking things or asking the judge questions during a contest, okay? Because it'll be wrong, it'll be marked wrong. So let's store the times in here, and we're gonna cast to an int. All right, but this time we can just say that, whatever. So now the first type of loop is the for loop. So a for loop has essentially a counter, and then after a starting value as well as an ending value. So to do this in Python, you'd say for I, or whatever variable you want to keep track of. This is your counter. Let's say it's for I, which is generally I, in range. So range is kind of the equivalent of putting all 3 of those values into one argument, into one object. So most people, what you can just do directly, for example, in this case, we can just say times. And this will give us a range like this. Right? So we're gonna start at 0. We're gonna go all the way to 5, not including 5. All right? But let's say we want to give a little more control. So let's say we're actually going to troll the user, and we're going to only multiply half the amount of times that we want them to do. So what we can do is we can say, we're going to start at 0. We're going to end at how many times, but each time we're not going to go up by 1, we're going to go up by 2. Okay, so this is start, stop, and then again, this is the same as our string splicing, right? It's start, stop, step. So this case, we're going to be going up 2, and then after we can say, we can just go ahead and have our number as like 10. Say number, and then after equals number times 10. So let's say we're going to multiply it 10 times, and then let's see our number now. Wow. It's only multiplied 5 times. Okay? So does everyone get for loops, how they work? Any questions about the range or anything? Okay, great. All right, so another thing I just want to touch on is you can see here that we did number equals number times 10. So whenever you have like this type of statement, so whether it be like number equals number plus 10 or whatever, what you can actually do is you can just say number plus equals and then put 10, or number times equals 10. All right, so this is a shorthand way just to reduce the amount of times that you have to type something. All right, so if we go ahead and just replace this now. You're gonna say number times equals 10, and this will give us the exact same result. All right. So that's the first for loop. This is, in my experience, probably the more common one. So I would get to learn this syntax very well. However, there is a while loop now. So with a while loop, you don't exactly give it all the information at once. All you're given is a condition. So you're going to say while, and then you're going to say something is true, do whatever. All right. So for example, let's say while number does not equal 10, we're going to print hello. But now we're going to ask the user so as long as let's change this so it doesn't immediately stop. As long as the user doesn't enter a number that's 10, the loop will continue. So as you can see here, we can say whatever here. So enter a number, we can say 14, whatever, we can say whatever we want, right? Other than a space. That's not right. But the moment we type 10, it exits. Okay? So this is more for when this condition is constantly changing and you're not really sure when it's going to end. All right? Now, just be careful that you're actually changing it. So for example, if you say while 1 equals 1, this loop is called an infinite loop. It's going to go on forever. I'm not going to run it because it's a pain to kill. So just be aware of that. Make sure you're not causing an infinite loop. And then finally, one thing that I just want to mention is commenting. So for example, let's say we wanted to disable this just temporarily. We can just put a comment here and this code will no longer run. All right, so that's just that. If you want to do multi-line comments, so comments on more than one line, you can put triple single quotes and then just put them in like that. However, this isn't really commenting because this is actually the syntax for a multi-length string. So if I say test equals this, we print test, we'll get that, okay? But generally, this is how we comment. It's just if we don't assign it to anything, it'll just be ignored. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about anything we did today? This kind of wraps up the syntax part of the lesson. Any questions about anything that we've gone through today? No questions? No questions? Is anyone alive? Talking to myself. All right. Well, so if you guys are comfortable with all of these, you guys can actually start working on a few contest problems. So this is going to get you a bit accustomed to how contests work. These are super simple problems and they incorporate just what we've touched on today. So if we go ahead and I'll post these here. So I'm gonna stick around in here, but you guys are free to leave now and start working on these questions. If you guys have any questions about the questions, I'll be in here and you can always ask. So yeah, that concludes our little meeting for now, for this week. So thanks for coming out, and If you have any questions over the course of the week, you can feel free to just put it in the channel, and then I will see it, and I'll get back to you. And I hope to see you guys next week.